Alright, hello everyone. So we are now on the second part of this video, which is the mechanisms of evolution. On the first part, we discussed what they called the natural selection. And on the natural selection, in order for the natural selection to happen, you need adaptation. And when you do adaptation, it causes a process called adaptive radiation, which leads to what they call speciation. Alright, so not all organisms, take note. I forgot on that video on that video to tell that not all not if one organism becomes adapted and then it survived, alright, so as it passed that particular trait to its future generation, so the organism becomes a new species. Alright, so the organism who are adapted to that particular environment becomes a new species. So technically, that's how natural selection works. Alright, next one. But not most of the time. Some organism becomes it becomes the same organism, but still they are adapted. So they did not become a new species. Alright, so the second mechanism of evolution is called genetic drift. Alright. So from the word itself, genetic drift, there is a movement. All right, so there's a movement, or there are changes in the genes. All right, so genes, technically the allelic frequency. All right, so the presence or the presence or of several traits. All right, so the variation of several traits in a particular population, that is what they call the allelic frequency. Alright, so within the population as a result of sampling error from generation to generation. So this is a random event that happens by chance in nature. Alright, so how do nature affect the allelic frequency of the organisms or population rather? Yeah, so we are talking here not one organism, but that's, let's put that organism into a population. So in a population, there is what they call variation. All right. So if you have many organisms there, all right. So why they become varied? It's because of their traits. All right. So one organism is not completely the same with the other organism because they are unique over each other. All right. Next one. Alright, please take note that that genetic drift may cause gene variants to disappear completely. Alright, so thereby reducing genetic variability. In contrast to natural selection, environment or adaptive pressures do not drive changes due to genetic drift. Alright, so unlike natural selection, so in unnatural selection, if the environment change, then so the organism will also change. Alright, so the organism must adapt. Now, in this kind of mechanism, the organism are not pressured to adapt to the environment. Alright, they are not pressured. So, meaning to say, there will be a particular process that makes an organism completely, their genes particularly will be completely disappear if there is something on the environment happen. All right, so in which they have what do you mean by this, short time to adapt, something like that. All right, so technically in genetic drift we do not include here how the organism adapt. All right, so let's take a look. So alright, so the first, alright, so in genetic drift, there are two things. So these are some example of genetic drift. So we have population bottleneck and a founder effect. Alright, so these are the two effects that will drastically change the allelic frequency of a certain population that we have, right? That is present on a particular environment. Alright, next one. So let's start first with the bottleneck effect. So the bottleneck effect occurs when there's a sudden sharp decline in a population size, typically due to environmental factors like natural disasters, earthquakes, tsunamis, epidemics that can decimate number of individual population, predation or habitat discussion. Alright, so meaning to say, this example, this environmental factor that we have right here, the organism do not have time to adapt. Alright, do not have time to adapt. They are literally decimated immediately. Alright, so we have this 100 population over here. If there's an earthquake, half of the population is killed. So, meaning to say, those that are killed did not be able to adapt. So, meaning to say, technically, what happens here, this is random. Alright, so these are random events. So you don't have an earthquake every day. Alright, so you don't have epidemics every day. Alright, so you don't have alright, so these particular environmental factors affect how the allelic frequency will be propagated, something like that. Alright, so how does the bottleneck effect works? Alright, so for example, this is a large population. Alright, so with different variation that we have right here. Alright, so in a certain event, so for example, an earthquake decimated some of the population. Alright, so decimated some of the population. So, for example, an earthquake, yun, that's the bottleneck effect. Yan, yung bottleneck event, that's the earthquake. Alright, earthquakes, tsunamis, or epidemics. So, for example, this organism was infected by some form of disease. Yan, some form of a disease. So, what happened? It killed off this organism, this one, and after that event, this group of organism remained. Alright, so since this trait, alright, so this trait is the only one remaining. So, this trait is more than the other one. So what will happen, this particular population will likely to survive, then this one will not. So technically, this allele will be eradicated. So as you can see on the final population here, there is no organism with this color, with this kind, that can be seen on generation 4. So that this is your final population. Alright, so that's how bottleneck event works. Alright, so this is the bottleneck effect. Okay, so the organisms that are decimated, alright, did not have time to survive or did not have time to adapt. So the one that will that the alleles or the genes or the trait that will remain, alright, so the more trait that the more traits in a particular population remains, the more chances it will survive. The less one will less likely to be eradicated in the future offspring. So, yeah. So, that is your population bottleneck. So, if you want to try this one, just buy a red and white beans. Alright, buy a red and white beans and then put that beans inside this bottle. Alright, so inside this bottle. Then, as you notice, so this, the neck of your bottle, that's why it's called bottleneck effect. So the neck of your bottle is your certain environmental event, random event, earthquakes and so on and so forth, that will trigger. So, as common sense, if you put your bottle upside down with beans inside, so the beans will just flow one by one. So, after that particular event, the beans that you collected after that event is the surviving population. Alright, so it's the surviving population after that event. And then, imagine if that particular, organism that survived that event will tend to reproduce. So, imagine how many red beans or how many white beans will be remained on that population as time passes by. Alright, so that is what they call the population bottleneck effect. Alright, next one. Alright, next one is the founder effect. So unlike the population bottleneck, this is the loss of genetic variation that occurs when a new population is established by a small number of individuals that are cleaved from a large population. So technically, in order to give you the detail of this one, so we will use this diagram. So our example, we have this population. As you can see, they are varied. All right, they are many and they are varied. So what if? All right, so what if this population, all right, tend to be separated from the others? Alright, so tend to be separated from the others by some sort of they migrate, Alright? They migrate, they inbreed, they are isolated, something like that. Yan. So, the only genes or the only alleles that will remain are this. Alright? So, with one of this. Okay? So, the thing here is that unlike your population bottleneck, the more a particular trait remains, the more the more chances it will be it will not disappear. So in this case, it will not disappear, but this one will not disappear, but the thing here is there is no variation among the population. Alright, there's no variation among the population. So what will happen? If this one is infected by a certain disease, therefore this population will likely to be decimated overnight. Alright, because they are not variated. Alright, so they are not varied. Okay, so meaning to say, that's the disadvantage of this founder effect. Alright, so example of this is some human population that performs inbreeding. We call it inbreeding. So they likely to marry their cousin in that particular kingdom, something like that, in order for the rich, in order for the treasure or something like the wealth of that family will not be transferred to any clan, something like that. So with that particular process, there is lack of genetic variability. All right, so there's lack of genetic variability. So what happened is, if there's a harmful gene in it, alright, if there's a harmful gene in that population, instead of removing that harmful gene, it is amplified and becomes dominant on that particular population. So likely that particular gene will be the one that will cause that population to be extinct. Alright, so something like that. Alright, so that's the founder effect. Okay, so one example of founder effect is the isolation. Alright, so the geographical isolation. So what we have here is the Grand Canyon squirrel. Alright, so what can you notice about these two squirrels that we have right here? Alright, so aside from its color, I know you will think of that differences. Alright, so as you can see, these two squirrels are completely different from each other. Alright, so one is their food habit and the size of their ears is different. Now, the story of these two squirrels, alright, so before they are located in one landmass. When the canyon or when the Grand Canyon separate, alright, when the Grand Canyon is created, so as the squirrels are also isolated to each other. Thus, they formed one group on the other side of the canyon and another group on the other side, which is they tend to speciate. Alright, they tend to speciate, so it created new organism and the other one. So we have now two squirrels coming from one. Alright, so that is what they call isolation. Alright, geographical to be exact. So geographical. Alright, so geographical isolation, we called it. Alright, next one. Alright, so the genetic drift. Alright, so technically, please take note of this one. The effect of genetic drift is larger in small population. Alright, so common logic. Alright, if you have small population, for example, we have 4 population here, and although they are varied, so this population is varied, but the thing here, if one certain event like earthquake struck this particular organism, therefore, if you have small population, then all of them might likely to die. Alright, so all of them might likely to die in that particular event. Now, whereas if you have large population, for example, 100 or 1,000, alright, so if you have 1,000 of population or 1,000 pieces of that organism there, alright, so if a certain event likely to happen on that particular area, then therefore that 1,000 population, even though some of them will die, but still there are some parts of the population that will remain. Alright, there are some organisms in that population that will still remain, and then they will likely to propagate and then create their generation, so on and so forth. Alright, so technically, genetic drift has larger effect in larger population, or small effect in larger population than in smaller population. Alright, so that is your genetic drift. Now, if you have questions, don't forget to write down your questions in the answer comment section of this video so that I will be able to attend to it. So, don't forget to do that. Or just look for me in school to ask your question. Alright, if you have a question. Alright, next one is mutation. So I will not linger more of this mutation. I have already discussed to you this one. So one of the agent of evolution is mutation. Once the organism mutate, once their body mutates, once their sequence are changed, that changes in their DNA sequence can be carried by their offspring in their future generation. So mutation is basically one of the major ingredients of evolution. So, technically, without mutation, there's no evolution. Basic logic. How will you evolve if you don't change? Alright, so something like that. So, there are two different groups of mutation. So, we have gene mutation and then we have chromosomal mutation. I believe I've already discussed to you this one. So, just look at that look for that video, and then if you have some questions about these two groups of mutation, you can find me. Alright, you can ask your question in the comment section. Alright, so next one. Alright, that is the third one, which is mutation. Alright, one of the mechanisms of evolution. And the fourth and final mechanism of evolution is the gene flow. Alright, so this is how mankind become variated to each other. Alright, so the transfer of genes, genes from gene pool of one population to another. So if you have a population of 100 here, and these are varied, alright, so these are varied, so we have different alleles over here, we have different alleles. So this is what they called your gene pool. Gene pool. Alright, so when I am teaching you in the classroom, so we are 45, you are 45, and plus 1, that's me, we are 46. So, meaning to say, in this particular classroom, in a particular classroom, we have already a gene pool. Alright, so we have already a gene pool. So, this is a collective term used to describe the variation of alleles in a particular place. Yeah, something like that. So that's a gene pool. Alright, gene flow may change the allele frequency or the range of alleles in the population due to migration of individuals or gametes that can produce in a different population. So, meaning to say, if we talk about migration, one thing comes in our mind, that is human. Alright, so that's the reason why there are humans that completely look different on those humans that are found in Europe, Africa, Central Asia, America, Australia, so on and so forth. Alright, so one thing that may affect the frequency of the alleles here is what they call your migration. When the organism move from one place to another. So you see how migration have an effect. Alright, have an effect on what they call the evolution of a particular organism. So that's migration. And when you migrate, for example, so this is the population that we have right here. Alright, so when you migrate from one place to another, so you migrate. So what will happen? Alright, so if that place have this kind of genes on that population, alright, so when these two mate, alright, when these two organisms mate in a particular population, so they might likely to produce a new variation of offspring, right? So that's the reason why some Americans tend to marry Asians, Asians marry Europeans, Africans marry Americans, so on and so forth. So when they marry, they tend to produce an offspring which is very unique. All right, so there is what they call an increase in variability in the genes. All right, so okay, so that's the gene flow. All right, so thus the introduction of new alleles increases variability. So as I've said earlier, so when an American marries an African, so there will be a new variation of genes that will happen. So increased variability. All right, so yan, you are allowing for the new combination of traits. All right, next one. All right, example of that is pollination. All right, so because of pollination, plants creates variability among themselves. All right, so pollens are carried by pollinators, then they tend to fertilize the egg of a female flower, something like that. Yan. Then with that, it increases variation. All right, so that's it. Pollination. Next one. All right, seed dispersion. Alright, not only the dandelion seeds that we have right here, we have coconut seeds, yan, we have guava seeds. The guava seeds are eaten by birds, and then birds will defecate and they just dump it somewhere else, which is far from its parent. So the thing there is what they call variation, something like that. Alright, so the seeds are dispersed. Alright, so they become a they become a new plant there. Then they will likely to mate with a plant with different kind. All right, same plant with different variations, so on and so forth. Then they will create a new organism, or not a new organism, sorry for that, new unique offspring. Yan. All right, so another variation in their offspring. All right, so example, very good example of that gene flow is what they called your human migration. Alright, so there you go. Human migration. Okay. So you know it already? Yan. So human migration. So this particular movement of genes, technically, literally movement of genes. So as the human or as the organism move, the organism carry its genes, and then they will likely to mate with another organism in that particular place. Then it increases variation among organisms in the population. Alright, so that is gene flow. And with that, alright, so if there's a macroevolution, macro means large. So meaning to say how Earth affects the evolution of the organism. So technically, the movement of the continents creates new environment that the organism will tend to adapt and survive, then reproduce. Alright, so in this lesson that we have, the mechanism of evolution creates what they call microevolution. Alright, so the microevolution refers to the changes in the allele frequency within the single population. So meaning to say how the allele changes, or how the changes in alleles affects the evolution of a particular individual in a particular area. Alright, so technically, this type of evolution down goes to genes. Alright, so how changes in genes affects the uniqueness of an individual in a particular area. Yeah. So when we talk about uniqueness, it says variation. Variation. Alright. So that is microevolution, the opposite of your macroevolution. Alright, so to end up our discussion in this fourth video, so I would like to end you with this one, that no matter what happens, and no matter how drastic the change in the environment is, life will still find a way. Alright, so that's how evolution works. Alright, so technically life goes on. Okay, so with that, I hope you did learn something new today. So this is the part 2 of the mechanism of evolution. So I hope okay, so this is the last video for evolution. So I hope you did connect all the concepts that we have right here so that you will be able to realize how important each of the particular concept with regards to evolution. All right, so with that, goodbye and thank you.